Welcome back, fellow nostalgia seekers. This is Howlin' Through Neo Tokyo, where we hold on for dear life as master mangaka Katsuhiro Otomo takes us on a wild ride through the perilous streets of a city where psychokinetic wonders wait around every corner. Last time, we watched as the cult of Akira demonstrated their power, with Tetsuo's aide calling most of the shots for them. By the way, I'll refer to the aide as Taicho from now on. This manga edition refers to him explicitly as the aide, but he's referred to as Taicho elsewhere, and it's easier to refer to him that way, so sorry for the switch up, but that's how we're going from now on. With Taicho at the helm, their primary objective becomes demonstrating their power in order to solidify their standing as a fledgling nation. Initially, this takes the form of telekinetic executions, one of which Lieutenant Yamada witnessed. This encounter brought him into contact with the cult, which resulted in the death of one of his soldiers. But it also resulted in him befriending Ryu, who helps guide him through the bombed-out city. We also saw number 19's identity revealed to be Lady Miyako. She explained her connections to the Akira project, as well as some of the underpinnings of the powers induced by the procedures. After meeting with her, Kei and Chiyoko set out on the perilous endeavor of transporting the remaining espers to Miyako's temple. This resulted in Chiyoko suffering a near-fatal wound. While her efforts allowed Kei and Masaru to reach the temple safely, it nearly resulted in her and Kyoko losing their lives. Luckily, Colonel Shikishima observed from the distance. In the end, he decided to lend assistance to his one-time enemy. Under the leadership of Taicho, the cultists put all their effort into retrieving the espers. However, when Kei, Chiyoko, and Lady Miyako thwarted his efforts, he declared war on Miyako's dominion. We've got an action-packed episode ahead of us tonight. The cult of Akira clashes with Miyako's followers in an all-out battle. On top of that, we see the return of a few familiar faces. I can't wait to share it with you. I'm Boy Meets TV, and tonight I'll be your guide through Neo Tokyo's tangled web of dark secrets and psychokinetic wonders. Chapter 21, Rage and Torment. As the chapter opens, Colonel Shikishima carries an unconscious Chiyoko on his shoulder. Out ahead, a caretaker robot whirs to life as it senses his presence. When the colonel identifies himself, however, it becomes apparent that he still wields control over the bots. It stands down immediately, allowing the colonel to pass. At the Cult of Akira hideout, Kiori watches Akira as the boy wades in the ankle-deep water. She looks up in horror when she hears Tetsuo scream. Inside, we see him panting as sweat beads his brow. A pile of pills sits in front of him. He grapples with a desire to drown out the pain with drugs. When he picks up a pill, rather than consume it, he crushes it between his thumb and forefinger. On the outskirts of Akira territory, Lieutenant Yamada observes through binoculars, trying to discern the origin of the scream. Ryu tries to goad the man into storming the hideout alone, saying that Akira looks pretty harmless playing in the water like a mere child. Their conversation is interrupted when a barge arrives at the cult hideout. Taicho disembarks in search of Tetsuo. Inside, Tetsuo crouches over in agony. Remember, Lady Miyako challenged him to overcome his addiction in order to fully awaken his telekinetic gifts. Succumbing to the immense pain, he grabs a handful of pills from the pile in front of him. He tosses a bunch of them in his mouth indiscriminately. However, something catches his eye, and he lets the pills fall to the floor rather than swallowing them. Tetsuo demands to know why Taicho interrupted him. Taicho tries to fill him in on the mission to secure the espers, but Tetsuo's uninterested. He tells Taicho to get lost. The mention of Lady Miyako alone isn't enough to grab Tetsuo's attention. He dismisses Taicho mercilessly, too overcome with the torment of the process he's undergoing to put any attention elsewhere. Storming out of Tetsuo's chambers, Taicho curses as he plops himself down defiantly in Akira's throne. As he sits there sulking, an idea strikes him. He addresses the subjects of the cult that poses as an empire. Assuming command for himself, he orders the subjects to round up all the fighting men in order to help him hatch his plot. Meanwhile, Colonel Shikishima lays Chiyoko down at his secret hideout. Blood seeps from the bandage around her midsection, but the doctor is only concerned with whether or not the colonel retrieved the cigarettes he was promised. Even when he goes to retrieve the alcohol to clean the wound, he continues to grumble about cigarettes. The colonel cleans and bandages Chiyoko's wounds, putting her to bed next to Kyoko. He picks up the remainder of the alcohol and swigs as the doctor questions what the colonel plans to do with Kyoko and Chiyoko. We can see that the working relationship between these two men is already strained, and that the two convalescing visitors only exacerbate the issue. At Lady Miyako's temple, we see that Masaru is in stable condition after receiving a high dose of the medication. Meanwhile, Kei soaks in the temple's bathhouse. She looks utterly catatonic as she goes about her business. Her aimless wandering brings her to the lookout in the temple's tower. As she gazes upon the derelict and dangerous city, she's finally overcome with the fear that Chiyoko might not be able to navigate the wasteland safely. Lady Miyako then enters the lookout. A depressing prospect, is it not? She asks Kei. Kei notes that Miyako talks like she can see through her eyes. Miyako admits that she can. That's because Kei is a gifted medium. In the manga, that means she's powerless herself, but she serves as a channel for others' gifts, thus explaining why Kyoko chose to use her as a telekinetic puppet. As Miyako walks with Kei questions the older woman. Kei asks why Miyako wasn't locked in the secret lab with the Espers. Lady Miyako sullenly explains that, at the age of just 10 years old, she died during an experiment. In her own words, she says, "The scientists in charge of the project were groping in the dark, desperate for any sign of progress, a breakthrough. They took chances with a very uncertain process. In retrospect, I would guess that we were the guinea pigs for the work that led to the creation of the number 20s. During the course of the experiment, I lost consciousness. They removed me from the project and project records and placed me in a state of suspended animation, which lasted 13 years. By the time I awoke, Neo Tokyo was under construction, and everyone had long since forgotten of my existence. Those who knew my secret vanished when Tokyo was destroyed. I had a dream during the long years of sleep. It was composed of fragmentary images of Akira, Neo Tokyo, Tetsuo and his allies, the future, the universe, and you, my dear, and your young friend, Kaneda." Hearing Kaneda's name awakened something in Kei. She questions the telekinetic woman about his whereabouts feverishly as a result. Miyako says he's beyond the boundaries of their world for the moment. Back in Akira territory, Seer scrambles to round up all the fighting men. They all collect guns and ammo in preparation to execute Taicho's plan. From the distance, Ryu and Yamada observe via binoculars. The formation of the militia concerns them, but they're more concerned with why they need to gather an army at all. At the colonel's hideout, we see him re-enter after venturing out into the desolate city. After a brief search, he finds the doctor hiding out in a dark room. The doctor dismisses the colonel's questions, but he's acting shifty. When a hammer falls from the hand he holds behind his back, the colonel strikes him. It seems the doctor planned to kill Kyoko in her sleep. He sees it as the only way to prevent yet another catastrophe from befalling the people of Neo Tokyo. However, the colonel points out that the trauma of her death could trigger another massive reaction from Akira. The colonel, unable to afford losing the doctor, tosses him a few cartons of cigarettes and dismisses him without any further action. Outside of the Cult of Akira hideout, Kaori sits with Akira as he plays in the water. While he does so, capsules begin to wash ashore all around him. Kaori recognizes them as Tetsuo's and is concerned, but Tetsuo says he threw them away. He's left his chambers finally, much to Kaori's surprise. "No more of that stuff for me. I want to go cold turkey, so I toss them," Tetsuo says as the others look up at him. We then catch up with Ryu and Yamada as they navigate the wreckage of a fallen skyscraper. Yamada speculates that Akira's army is targeting Lady Miko's compound. However, he says it's not of his concern. He's got to accomplish the one thing he came to the city for, and that's to kill Akira. With most of the cultists gone, Ryu and Yamada use the opportunity to search the cultist hideout. As they descend a rock face to infiltrate the hideout, Ryu tries to convince Yamada not to attack Akira. Even by himself, Akira is dangerous, Ryu says. Yamada responds by saying he wants to find out why. I've gotta admire your courage, even if it is based on total ignorance, Ryu continues. On the stone throne, Tetsuo sits hunched over with his hands on his head, clearly still in severe discomfort. Yamada observes through the binoculars as Ryu explains Tetsuo's identity and role. Overcome with pain, Tetsuo slams his head back against the throne. Power radiates from him, and soon the only thing left on the throne is a bloody spot where he slammed his head. He's vanished. Astonishment washes over Yamada's face as he tries to contend with what he just witnessed. Before he can comprehend what he saw, an explosion rips out from underwater. It's Tetsuo, flying into the sky with incredible force. At that moment, we see Lady Miyako, Masaru, and Kyoko as they sense the incredible power. The shock is so much it woke Kyoko up from her coma. When the colonel leans in to hear what she's saying, he's shocked to hear that she wants to go to Lady Miyako's temple. Outside of the temple, Akira's forces have amassed, led by Taicho. He gives them the command to charge, and we watch as they storm into the ragtag encampment that Kei and Chiyoko traveled through in the last episode. Back at their hideout, the colonel and doctor discuss their plan. This is their trump card, the laser cannon, Soul, linked up to a small remote the colonel can keep on hand. On the plus side, this gives him the ability to pinpoint the powerful weapon on any enemy. On the downside, the remote has an extremely limited range, meaning the colonel will have a very narrow window to escape the blast upon calling it in. The colonel is ready to go all in to stop Tetsuo and Akira. His only other priority is moving Kyoko to safety first. Back on the outskirts of Akira's hideout, Ryu and Yamada watch in terror as the wave from Tetsuo's power surge approaches their position. It washes over the bridge they stand on, nearly sending them cascading into the ocean. As the water washes away, Tetsuo is revealed to have traveled to their location. I saw a lot of ships out there. They're your friends, aren't they? Tetsuo asks Yamada. Yamada's gobsmacked by Tetsuo's knowledge of the military's operations. So many, but so weak, Tetsuo continues. Terrified, Yama pulls his gun on Tetsuo. What the hell are you? He asks. Tetsuo smiles before replying, You came to kill Akira, didn't you? His maniacal laughter rings out, followed by another massive surge of his telekinetic powers as he flies off into the sky. At Lady Miyako's temple, we see Taicho as he tries to parley with one of Miyako's monks. The monk tells Taicho that Miyako will be unavailable for an audience. Taicho won't be turned away easily, however. He demands to have Kei and Masaru handed over to him. Taicho tries to portray Chiyoko and Kei's action as murdering innocent civilians, but that doesn't sway the monk in the slightest. Overcome with anger, Taicho snaps his fingers, prompting one of his men to unload an entire magazine into the monk. The militia simply walks around his dead body on their way further into the temple. In Miyako's chamber, we see one of her monks disturb her meditation. He informs her about the armed militia storming the gates, before we quickly cut back to the invasion. Akira's forces storm through the antechamber, ruthlessly gunning down anyone who tries to stop them, like the boy who tried to push one of the militiamen off his mother. The soldier doesn't hesitate to shoot the boy down in cold blood. Meanwhile, other soldiers have found the stairway leading to Miyako's chamber. Several monks try to bar their entrance, but the soldiers open fire. Taicho follows the path they clear through the crowd, barking out orders to find and kill Lady Miyako. Nearby, we see Kei observing from behind a pillar. Overcome with anger over the atrocities, she charges a nearby soldier. He tries to fire on her, but she strikes him with an elbow, sending him falling to the ground. Our perspective then shifts back to Colonel Shikishima. The doctor instructs him on how to use the handheld targeting device for Soul's laser cannon. Even though the doctor gives the colonel this rundown, he seems to think that it's pointless, since the colonel is almost certainly walking towards his own demise. However, the colonel is determined to achieve his goals. He sets out from his hideout with Kyoko in his arms. He stores the girl in the chamber of the caretaker bot for safe transportation, before setting off into the war-torn and deadly landscape. Back at Miyako's temple, a bloody monk cowers against a wall as Taicho questions him for Miyako's whereabouts. When the monk won't answer, Taicho doesn't think twice before ordering one of his men to kill him. The soldier hesitates, only exacerbating Taicho's anger. He screams at the soldier, ordering him to open fire before the chapter ends. Chapter 22, Blood Siege. This chapter opens with Kei in her room within Miyako's temple. She pulls her boots on and examines her weapon until a screeching noise rips her attention away. She's bathed in an ethereal glow as she turns to ascertain the source. Superimposed in front of a storm gray sky, we see shock overcome Tetsuo as he senses the telekinetic force that Kei is experiencing. He calls out Kanada's name before we cut back to Kei. Kanada's ghostly apparition stands in front of her. "Where am I?" the spectral figure of Kanada asks before he blinks away in a flash. Kei's left standing there alone in her room, the sounds of the battle ringing out all around her. Downstairs, we see a bloody monk dragging himself to Miyako's chamber to warn her of the impending doom. With his dying gasps, he tries to tell her to save herself, but it appears he's too late. Taicho and his men enter Miyako's chamber right behind him. "The famous Lady Miyako, I can't tell you how thrilled I am," Taicho says through a smirk. The monks form rank around Miyako, creating a human shield. The soldiers train their weapons on the monks as Taicho sneers. "Don't talk if you don't want to. We'll kill you no matter what," Taicho says. "This achieves nothing," Miyako responds. Taicho tries to say that he's there to attain glory for his lords, Akira and Tetsuo, but Lady Miyako calls him out on his bullshit. "Don't play games. The only glory that interests you is your own," she challenges him. His anger flares, revealing that she struck a chord. He riles his men up, but the monks decide to preempt an attack. In unison, several of them bow their heads in concentration. They train their palms towards the cultist soldiers. When one of the soldiers attempts to shoot, his gun backfires. "Have you clowns got the power?" Taicho questions in shock. Miyako orders her monks to destroy the soldiers' guns, but not hurt them. However, Taicho calls in his own psychic enforcers. "You wield the power and threaten the future of the great Tokyo Empire," he says. We then cut back to the remainder of the cult's forces. As they begin to strip the women to take advantage of them, Miyako's devotees decide to stand up for themselves. Not only does a group of the sick and enfeebled attack the cultist soldiers, but the one surviving monk calls on his telekinetic powers to take out several of the soldiers. The rest of the devotees then charge in, meeting the soldiers in combat. Our perspective then shifts deeper into the interior of the temple. We see a group of cultists as they search for Masaru. Their attention is called to a hallway being guarded by monks. "I guess this must be the place," one of them says. "We'll find out for sure when we attack," another replies. We then get a brief cut to Kei rushing through the temple before cutting back to the hallway to see the cultists have already cut down the monks. Just as they take out the last one, they become aware of someone bearing down on them. It's Kei, determination etched into her face. When she sees what the cultists have done, she charges them. "I don't know how many of them there are, but these guys aren't going to beat me," she says as she approaches them. One of them opens fire, but his orders are to keep her alive, so he's forced to aim for her leg. This allows her to stand her ground and open fire, taking them all out in a single blast. She rushes in to check on Masaru, who's still being guarded by several monks. He's safe and continues to rest. Kei tasks the monks with moving Masaru to safety as she rushes off to help Lady Miyako. Back in Miyako's chamber, we see one of the cult's telekinetic enforcers as they face off with Lady Miyako's monks. Like a conductor, she guides them. She instructs them to concentrate in order to maintain the flow of energy. After giving this order, we see a surge of telekinetic power blast the cultists through the wall. This is of no concern to Taicho, who simply orders them to send in another soldier endowed with the power. When we catch back up with Kei, we see her dashing down the stairs to the temple's main hall. All throughout the hall, we can see glimpses of Lady Miyako's devotees as they beat down the cult forces. One of the devotees appears to recognize Kei and is taken aback by her presence. This is Kaisuke, a member of the Capsule Gang who recognizes her from her time with Kaneda. As Kei continues her trek into the heart of the skirmish, she talks to herself. It's not a real army, just a bunch of ragtags, and they're already losing it. If I can break through their chain of command, they'll destroy themselves, she says to herself. This is confirmed when she overhears a conversation. Their forces have dwindled. The chain of command has been broken, and they admit that Miyako's devotees are putting up more resistance than they could have anticipated. Kei sees the weakness and pounces. Back in Miyako's chamber, Taicho's anger builds as his telekinetic enforcers succumb to defeat against the monks. Taicho goads on the last enforcer, but it's too late. Kei was able to use the chaos and confusion to her advantage, picking her way through the ranks and making it all the way to Taicho's side. He tries to attack her when she reveals herself, but she quickly gets the upper hand. Holding him at gunpoint, she orders him to surrender. On his way out of the temple, Taicho gives the order to assemble his men. Kei leads him out at gunpoint and forces him to announce their surrender. Despite sweating with fear, Taicho doesn't give the order. In the silence, Kaisuke steps up, attempting to talk sense into the forces. "Don't you know when you're beaten?" he asks. "Now drop those guns before we kill your leader and kick your butts again." His speech works. It prompts the men to drop their weapons. However, despite suffering a decisive loss, Taicho vows retribution. "Don't think you've beaten us. We'll keep sending troops till you're all dead," Taicho says. Kei just laughs him off. "Next time, tell Tetsuo to come in person," she says before sending Taicho on his way. Atop the skeleton of a skyscraper, Tetsuo sits in meditation. His body is emaciated and gaunt. Storm clouds whip around him, almost appearing to emanate from him. Back on the ground, Taicho tries to get one more threat in at Kei before fleeing, but she's unfazed by it. She turns heel to head back inside. As she does, Kaisuke tries to get her attention. When he catches up to her, she still doesn't recognize him. It's only once he brings up Kaneda that recognition dawns on her. Excitement overcomes them both. It's as if coming together transported them back to a time before all of the chaos and destruction. After finding a place nearby, the two sit to catch up. Kaisuke was picked up by the army at the pier, but instead of imprisoning him with Kaneda and Kei, they sent him to a reform school. In turn, Kei tells Kaisuke about all the friends from the resistance she's lost. But it seems like she's lost more than that. Neo Tokyo used to be a place she was willing to fight for, to die for. Now, she would leave the city behind if she could. "There's plenty of us who feel the same way, but we can't just abandon Neo Tokyo," Kaisuke says. He then turns his attention to Tetsuo. Just like Kaneda, he views it as their responsibility to put a stop to his reign of terror. A natural segue, Kaisuke's thoughts shift to Kaneda. "He was right at the heart of where it happened. I don't think he had time to get away," Kei says. "Kaneda, dead? I didn't think it could ever happen." Kaisuke responds, before asking hilariously if Kaneda ever hit that. Kei's adamant that they were just friends, and that it's embarrassing even talking about the subject. In response, Kaisuke tells her that Kaneda might have loved her. Kei's taken aback by the statement, but he doesn't give her time to question it. The two of them rise and decide to get to work on their plan to put a stop to Tetsuo once and for all. Meanwhile, an embarrassed Taicho marches back with his remaining soldiers. Ego bruised, he's already planning a redoubled effort to take the temple and kill Lady Miyako. Elsewhere, the Colonel struggles to get through the jagged landscape with the caretaker bot. However, he's close to Lady Miyako's temple. He can see the spire of the tower on the horizon. Back in the temple, we get a glimpse of the aftermath of the battle as Kei and Kaisuke make their way to Lady Miyako's chamber. Lady Miyako kneels meditatively in front of the bas relief, flanked by her monks. Kei has come to convince her to leave the temple, but Miyako refuses. Kei pleads with her, trying to paint a picture of how bleak the situation looks. Lady Miyako still refuses, saying, "Even if I were willing to forsake my followers, could you really ask me to abandon the sick and helpless just to save myself?" Kei believes that leaving will spare the innocents, since the cult of Akira is only after Miyako and the Espers, but Miyako remains steadfast in her resolve. Number 27 and I will remain here. It was no series of random accidents that brought us all together. We must permit destiny to follow its course, Lady Miyako explains. Outside of the chamber, Kaisuke sulks about not being permitted an audience with Lady Miyako. Outside of the window, he sees fire and smoke in the distance. Signs that the cult is attacking again, already. A sign that the cult has already begun their second attack. He alerts Kei before our perspective quickly shifts to the inferno outside, the burning bodies of innocents engulfed in it. Taicho orders his men to burn everything to the ground. He calls for more ammo and more men. He's going all out, employing Seer to relay orders to the militia at large. Nearby, the Colonel's path converges with a swarm of cultist goons, heeding the call to battle. His eyes narrow as he assesses the situation, realizing what it means for his plan to bring Kyoko to the temple. In the vicinity of the temple, Lady Miyako's flock struggles to flee from the raging fire and the approaching soldiers. Kei and Kaisuke both instinctually begin to run into the fray to save the innocent people, but Kaisuke makes a really great point. Once the cultists arrive, it will be impossible to differentiate between them and the refugees. With that realization, they attempt to get back to the temple, but the throng is so dense, travel becomes incredibly difficult. When we catch up with Taicho, we see the level of firepower he's dedicating to the incursion. Not only do they have assault rifles and grenades, but they have heat-seeking missiles and an armored truck. On top of that, they've also rigged the bridge up with explosives. This is an all-out assault. Finally, back at the temple, Kei delineates commands to Miyako's monks. She orders them to move all of the refugees off of the main floor and to clear an escape route. She tells Miyako that if she won't leave, Kei will take Masaru herself. However, Miyako is barely listening. Her face is overcome with a horrible grimace. "Kei, can't you feel the build of tension and energy? I feel as though my chest might collapse," she says, just before an explosion rings out. That's when Kaisuke runs in, informing Kei that the attack has begun. As they assess the situation, it becomes apparent that escape is no longer an option. The only option they see is to ascend the tower and hope they can wait out the battle. Chapter 23, Akira's Reign. Chapter 23 opens with a literal bang. A cultist foot soldier fires an RPG into Miyako's temple. They're aiming for the tower. Taicho has even gone so far as to offer a commendation to the first man who hits it. Taicho looks on menacingly, uttering a wish under his breath that Lady Miyako live long enough to die by his hand. We then catch up with the Colonel, who's struggling to navigate the landscape without tipping off the cult to his presence. As he comes to a dead end, his fear comes true. A group of soldiers ambush him with their weapons drawn. The cultist tries to intimidate the Colonel, but the Colonel calls his bluff. The backtalk strikes a nerve with the cultist, causing him to give the order to fire on the Colonel. But one of the cultist men intervenes. It's one of the Colonel's former soldiers who recognizes him. The other cultists try and convince him that it'll be cathartic and fun to kill his old boss, but the former military man remains indecisive, despite again being given the order to fire. However, our perspective cuts away just as he's being forced to decide. We catch up with the group at Lady Miyako's temple. Explosions rip through the structure as Kei, Keisuke, Masaru, and Lady Miyako are escorted to the tower by a group of monks. Lady Miyako remains adamant that it's not worth running from fate. She believes she's seen what is to come and there's no avoiding it. However, Kei remains focused on protecting everyone as best as she can. As the elevator ascends, Masaru wakes up. Drowsy, he croaks out Kyoko's name, before awakening with a start as a great wave of telekinetic power becomes detectable. Its immensity overwhelms him, transporting his senses to where Tetsuo stands, overcome by the same force. Inside of the caretaker bot's pod, Kyoko also cries out in awareness of the stream of power. Outside of the pod, the cultists continue to argue. The colonel's former subordinate just can't bring himself to open fire on his former boss. That's when the caretaker's pod opens. Kyoko reaches out to the colonel, urging him to hurry to Miyako's tower. She can sense Masaru's power there and yearns to reunite with him. Excited about Kyoko's awakening, the colonel walks forward quickly, forgetting about the gun that's fixed on him. The cultist opens fire on him, landing several shots. As the colonel sits slumped over on the ground, the cultist approaches him, ridiculing the colonel. He puts the gun to the colonel's head, squeezing the trigger. But when shots ring out, it's the cultist who gets hit. It seems the colonel's former subordinate remains loyal to the bitter end, as he shot his fellow cult member to save the colonel's life. We then cut back to Taicho as he oversees the cult incursion. As the smoke billows behind him, one of his men recounts the run-in with Shikishima and Kyoko. Taicho orders a crew of 6 men to go retrieve Kyoko by force. He then instructs the remaining forces on their planned assault set to begin in 30 minutes. When we get back to Colonel Shikishima, he's unable to walk without the assistance of his ex-soldier. Despite his condition, the colonel maintains his course for Lady Miyako's temple. Not only that, he remains a steadfast tactician. I want to know all about your forces, their numbers, and strength of arms, he inquires of his ex-soldier as they walk. The ex-soldier reveals that the cult only has about 50 men, and of those 50, only about 25 are trained soldiers. The colonel's ears perk up when he hears this. Those trained soldiers, are they my men? The colonel inquires. The ex-soldier responds in the affirmative. The colonel's focus then shifts slightly. He asks the ex-soldier why he stayed in Neo-Tokyo. This is where my wife died, he responds. And, unfortunately, that's where he comes to rest as well, as those are his last words. A barrage of bullets tears him apart in the very next breath. The cultists have found the colonel. The colonel acts quickly, however, jumping down the hillside and into a deep ditch. Once at the bottom of the hill, he doesn't run. Instead, he turns back to the cultists and points the remote targeting system for Soul's laser cannon at them. When we return to Kei's perspective, we see her group's shock as the elevator doors open to a blinding light. It's Tetsuo. Tetsuo sits casually in the tower's lookout after having smashed the windows to bits to get inside. For the first time since his return, he's ditched the red robe, notably revealing his mechanical arm for all to see. Despite his imposing initial presence, Tetsuo is incredibly pallid and gaunt. He appears as if he could keel over at any second. He begs for drugs, to which Miyako responds with scorn and derision. Accept the pain and face your destiny, she commands him. Keisuke sees his opening to exact revenge on Tetsuo, and goes for it. However, Kei stops him. She can sense something sinister in Tetsuo's demeanor. His grimace turns to a scowl as he looks down his furrowed brows at the group in front of him. Meanwhile, the colonel attempts to evade gunfire long enough to fix Soul's laser cannon on the cultists. Finally, the targeting system kicks in, triggering Soul to send an ungodly blast from the heavens down onto the already ruined city street. The explosion is so massive, all the different players witness its effects from their respective positions. Tetsuo's triggered by the sight of the laser cannon. And I really love the subtle clue Otomo gives us here of him grabbing at his mechanical arm as if he's feeling the pain of being struck by Soul all over again. He cries out in agony before jumping off into the sky, a pathway through the clouds opening up for him as he ascends at a ridiculous rate. The surge of telekinetic power from Tetsuo is so immense it even causes Akira to react. We see his ever-placid face shift to a grimace as he detects it. His reaction is juxtaposed with a shot of Tetsuo's agony, the urgency of Masaru attempting to telepathically locate Kyoko, and of the Colonel reaching out a bloody hand towards the pod she rests in. Above it all, the sky starts to burn with such intensity it almost appears to be a new sun. We get to see up close, at the nexus of the blaze, Tetsuo. The stream of power has overcome him in the same way that it has with Akira in the past, fueling this incredible outburst, the force of which is so powerful that buildings are being ripped up from the ground towards its gravity. As well as lifting the buildings, it also dropped someone. Kaneda is seen falling through the trail of rubble leading into the sky. Kei spots him from the lookout, immediately recognizing him as he falls to the ground. We catch up with him to see him luckily landing on the canopy of a tent, which cushions his fall. Kaneda is not entirely home free yet. The buildings that got sucked up into Tetsuo's power surge come crashing down just as fast as Tetsuo blasts off into the upper atmosphere. Kaneda has to run for his life as the rubble falls all around him. As Tetsuo leaves the atmosphere, he's pulled into a series of visions. This is him coming face to face with the power stream Miyako mentioned last episode. Not only that, it's a rebirth of sorts. The power stream shows him flashbacks of his entire life, all the way back to his birth. Two people stand over him, doting on him. It's his mother and his father, two people he's never really gotten to know or even see pictures of. We then flash forward to Tetsuo on a playground as a child. A group of boys walk away after breaking his action figure. As young Tetsuo reaches down to pick up the pieces, they transform into a sea of drug capsules. Present-day Tetsuo screams out to make it stop, but it goes on. The memory reverts back to normal, showing a young Kaneda glaring at Tetsuo through a hole in a fence. Tetsuo tries to fly away, but he's greeted by a blinding white light that stops him in his tracks. Back on the ground, the fire spreads rapidly throughout Miyako's temple. The earth trembles all around them. "Is this your cry at the trauma of rebirth, number 41? Lady Miyako cries out. Immense destruction overcomes the area around the compound, sending Taicho searching for cover. Even the indomitable Colonel Shikishima seeks cover under the caretaker bot. In outer space, Tetsuo approaches an asteroid field. It swirls in the same pattern that Akira was making in Chapter 19. Tetsuo flies into it until he comes up to what I'll call the source. This is what the sculpture in Lady Miyako's temple depicts. For the first time, Tetsuo faces it head-on. As he looks into the abyss, he sees the figure of a young boy phase through. It's Akira. When Tetsuo meets Akira's eyes, he's pulled away from the source. He falls onto the stone steps in front of the young boy. As he stares into Akira's eyes, it looks as if Tetsuo is on the verge of tears. Tetsuo follows the boy to his throne. When the boy sits, Tetsuo bows before him, this time clearly meaning the gesture of fealty. Before the chapter ends, we zoom out on the rubble from the blast. Amidst the wreckage, we see Kaneda. He's absolutely bedraggled and battle-worn, but alive. Aight boys, it's chapters 21 through 23. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I was going on about last video. I'm absolutely enthralled by this portion of the story. There's so much intriguing conflict to go along with a healthy dose of action. We get to delve so deeply into the chaos the city faces after Akira's powers go haywire. And we get this wide ensemble cast that I think Otomo really wanted to depict in both the anime and the manga, but clearly he's allowed a lot more leeway to accomplish that in the manga, because this cast of characters has gotten to be quite varied and wide, and I enjoy and appreciate quite a few of them. In short, the end of this is a lot of fun, and it deviates a lot from the anime, so it's just really rewarding and fulfilling reading this part. One of my favorite things here is this conflict, this war of opposing factions that gets set up here. We saw before we had the resistance in the military, and now we get the cult of Akira and Miyako's devotees, and I just really like the dynamic that this brings out. Overall, Miyako's role is far expanded from what she does in the anime, and I think that really helps to round out this latter portion of the story. Lieutenant Yamada and America's involvement is also a really welcomed addition in my opinion. This is going to come even more into the forefront in the next episode, which I'm really excited about. I just find it so intriguing to get more insight into the outside world's reaction to the aftermath of the Akira project. And we're going to get a lot of that in the coming episodes. I absolutely cannot wait. Anyway, that's it for me for now. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.